The letter arrived with a return address from a Vietnamese restaurant in Orange County. Mr. Thompson, my name is Nguyen Van Duc. I was your translator in Quang Nam Province, 1969. I need to tell you something about the village interrogations. Something I mistranslated. Something that changed what your unit did that day. I'm old now, sick. I need to tell the truth before I die. Please come. Nguyen Van Duc. I hadn't heard that name in 54 years. Our translator during some of the worst months of my Vietnam deployment. A young Vietnamese man who'd worked with American forces, risking his life to help us communicate with villagers, gather intelligence, navigate the impossible complexity of a country at war. And now, more than half a century later, he was telling me he'd mistranslated something. Something that had changed what we did. I flew to California with a sense of dread. At 73 years old, I'd made peace with most of my Vietnam experiences. The things I'd seen, the things I'd done, the moral complexity of fighting in someone else's country. But if Duc was saying he'd mistranslated during interrogations, that meant decisions we'd made based on his translations might have been based on false information, and I was terrified of what that might mean. The restaurant was small, family-owned, closed for the night when I arrived. Duc answered the door himself, elderly, fragile, moving with difficulty. But his eyes still held that sharp intelligence I remembered. Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. You said you mistranslated something. Something that changed what we did. I need to know what you mean. He led me to a corner table, already set with tea and documents. We sat, and for a long moment he just looked at me, as if gathering courage. September 17, 1969. Your platoon entered a village in Quang Nam Province. You were looking for Viet Cong. You gathered the village elder and several other men for interrogation. I translated. Do you remember? I did. It was one of dozens of similar operations. Enter a village suspected of supporting the enemy, question the locals, try to gather intelligence without alienating the population. Standard counterinsurgency work that always felt like walking a tightrope. I remember. We questioned maybe 6 or 7 villagers that day. You translated their answers. We determined the village was providing food to VC units passing through the area. That's correct. We did determine that. Duc's hands were shaking as he reached for a worn notebook. But what I need to tell you is that I mistranslated one crucial exchange. And that mistranslation led to a decision that haunts me 54 years later. What did you mistranslate? Duc opened the notebook to pages filled with Vietnamese and English notes, side by side. The village elder, his name was Tran Van Minh, was being questioned by your lieutenant. Lieutenant asked if the village was supporting the Viet Cong. Elder Minh said something in Vietnamese. And I translated his answer as, yes, we give them food because they threaten us. They force us to help them or they'll kill our families. I remember. That's why we classified it as a village under VC control rather than a sympathetic village. We understood they were being coerced. But that's not what Elder Minh said. Duc's voice broke. What he actually said was, we give them food because they are our sons. They are from this village. They are fighting for our country's freedom. We support them willingly. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? The village wasn't being coerced. They were willing supporters. Elder Minh was proud of the VC fighters from his village. Proud that his own son was among them. But I translated it as coercion instead of willing support. Why? Why would you mistranslate that? Duc looked at me with anguished eyes. Because I knew what your unit would do if I told you the truth. If I'd translated accurately, that the village willingly supported the Viet Cong, that they were proud of it, your lieutenant would have classified them as enemy sympathizers, active supporters. And the response to active supporters was much harsher than the response to coerced civilians. I was 22 years old. I'd seen what happened to villages classified as active VC supporters. Arrests, detentions, sometimes worse. So I lied. I mistranslated to make the village seem like victims rather than participants. I thought I was protecting them. I felt sick. What happened after that? What decision did we make based on your translation? Your lieutenant decided to post a small team in the village for a few days, to protect the villagers from VC coercion, to try to win hearts and minds by showing American forces could keep them safe from the insurgents they claimed to fear. The memory was coming back now, sharper than I wanted it to be. We posted a 4-man team. Jenkins, Rodriguez, Chen, and Private Kowalski stayed in the village for 3 nights, patrolling, trying to build rapport with the locals. On the 3rd night, September 20th, the team was attacked, ambushed by VC who had detailed knowledge of their positions, their routines, their vulnerabilities. All 4 were killed. Duc nodded, tears streaming down his weathered face. The VC who attacked them were from that village. Elder Minh's son was among the attackers. The intelligence that allowed for such a precise ambush came from the villagers your team had been trying to protect. Because they weren't victims being coerced. They were willing participants in the insurgency. And my mistranslation made your unit treat them as friendlies instead of as threats. I couldn't breathe. 4 men. 4 Marines under my command. I'd been squad leader by then, dead because our translator had lied about what the villagers said. You got them killed. Your mistranslation got 4 Marines killed. Yes. Duke's voice was barely audible. My lie, meant to protect Vietnamese civilians, resulted in the deaths of 4 American soldiers who trusted that translation, who made decisions based on false information I provided. Why didn't you tell anyone? Why let us operate on false intelligence? Because I didn't know they'd be attacked. I thought the worst consequence of my mistranslation would be that your unit would be gentler with the village than they deserved. I didn't anticipate that you'd post a team there, didn't foresee that my lie would put Americans in danger. And after the attack, after the 4 men died, I was terrified. Terrified that if I admitted I'd mistranslated, I'd be blamed for their deaths, that I'd be prosecuted, that I'd be killed by other Americans seeking revenge. So I stayed silent. Duck pulled out more papers from a folder. These are my original notes from that day, what Elder Min actually said in Vietnamese, and what I told your lieutenant he said. Documentation of the mistranslation. I looked at the notes. The Vietnamese characters meant nothing to me, but the English translation Duck had written showed the discrepancy. What the elder had actually said versus what Duck had reported. I've carried this for 54 years, Duck continued. Carried the knowledge that 4 American soldiers died because of my lie, that Jenkins, Rodriguez, Chen, and Kowalski were killed in an ambush that was made possible by intelligence I deliberately falsified. When the war ended, I evacuated to America, built a life here, opened this restaurant, raised a family, but I've never forgotten those 4 names. Never stopped seeing their faces in the casualty reports I read after the ambush. Why tell me now, after 54 years? Duck coughed, a wet, painful sound. Lung cancer, stage 4. Maybe 3 months left, and I can't die carrying this secret. Can't meet my ancestors knowing I let American soldiers die through my dishonesty and never confessed. I need someone who was there to know the truth, to understand that the ambush wasn't random bad luck. It was the direct result of my mistranslation, and I need you to decide what should be done with this information. I stood and walked to the window, trying to process this. Jenkins, Rodriguez, Chen, Kowalski, 4 young men, barely out of their teens, killed in an ambush. I'd spent 54 years believing they'd died because we'd been unlucky, because we'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now I was learning they'd died because our translator had lied to us, had deliberately given us false intelligence that made us treat enemies as friends. Did you know? I turned to face Duckry. When you heard about the ambush, did you know immediately it was connected to your mistranslation? I suspected. When I heard the details that the attack showed intimate knowledge of the team's movements, that it involved VC from the village, I knew. My lie had enabled it. If I'd translated accurately, your lieutenant would never have posted that team there. Those 4 men would have lived, and you said nothing. I said nothing. I was a coward. I prioritized my own safety over honoring the deaths I'd caused, and I've been paying for that cowardice every day since. Duke stood with difficulty and walked to a small altar in the corner of the restaurant. On it were photographs, Vietnamese family members, traditional offerings, and 4 American military photographs. Jenkins, Rodriguez, Chen, Kowalski. I found their service photos in military archives. I keep them here. Light incense for them every day. It's not atonement. Nothing can atone for what I did, but it's acknowledgement, recognition that they died because of me. I looked at the photos of the 4 young Marines. I'd served with them, knew their jokes, their dreams, their fears. Rodriguez had been planning to marry his high school girlfriend when he got home. Chen wanted to go to college on the GI Bill. Jenkins talked constantly about his daughter who'd been born 3 months before he deployed. Kowalski was the youngest, just 18, still figuring out who he was. All dead because a translator had lied. What do you want from me, Duke? Forgiveness. I can't give you that. Those weren't my deaths to forgive. I don't want forgiveness. I want you to know the truth. And I want you to help me decide if the families should be told. If Jenkins's daughter should know that her father died because of a translator's lie. If Rodriguez's widow should learn that his death wasn't random bad luck but the direct result of deliberate misinformation. Why would you tell them that? What would it accomplish except causing more pain? The truth. Even if it's painful, even if it makes me into a villain in their eyes, they deserve to know why their loved ones really died. I sat back down heavily. Let me understand this. You want me to help you contact 4 families and tell them that 54 years ago their loved ones died because you mistranslated an interrogation, that you've been hiding this truth their entire lives, that everything they believed about how their father, husband, son died was based on incomplete information. Yes, because they deserve the truth, and because I need to confess to someone besides you. Need the families most affected to know what I did, even though it will destroy them, even though it will reopen wounds that have taken 5 decades to heal, even though, because living with comfortable lies hasn't served anyone. I've been tormented by guilt. You've been operating on false understanding of what happened. and the families have been mourning deaths they don't fully understand. Maybe the truth will be painful, but at least it will be honest. Over the next hours, Duke told me everything he remembered about that day. The interrogation, Elder Min's actual words, his decision to mistranslate, the moment he'd heard about the ambush and realized his lie had consequences he'd never imagined. I tried to rationalize it, he explained. Told myself that the ambush would have happened anyway, that even if I'd translated accurately, your unit would have made some decision that put people at risk, that the chaos of war made everything unpredictable regardless of my translation. But I knew that was a lie. If I'd been honest about what Elder Min said, your lieutenant would have classified that village very differently, would never have posted a team there as friendly presence. The specific circumstances that led to those 4 deaths were directly created by my mistranslation. Did anyone else know? The other villagers, the VC fighters, did they know you'd mistranslated? I don't know. The villagers may have wondered why Americans treated them as coerced victims when they considered themselves proud supporters. But I was careful never to reveal my duplicity, never admitted to anyone what I'd done, until now. 54 years of silence, and finally I'm breaking it, because I'm dying and because the weight has become unbearable. Duck pulled out another document. This is a list. The 4 men who died, their families as I've been able to research them. Jenkins's daughter is alive, 60 years old now, living in Texas. Rodriguez's widow remarried, but I found her. Chen's parents are deceased, but he had siblings. Kowalski's mother died years ago, but his brother is alive. I want to contact them, tell them what I did, give them the truth about how their loved ones died, and I'm asking you to help me, to be there when I confess, to confirm that I was your translator, that the interrogation happened as I describe, that my confession is credible. Why would I help you devastate these families? Because you're a man of honor, because you believe truth matters, and because carrying this secret has poisoned both of our lives for 54 years. Maybe telling it will poison theirs too, but at least the poison will be visible instead of hidden. I thought about the 4 families, about Jenkins's daughter, who'd grown up without her father, about Rodriguez's widow, who'd spent her life believing her husband died in random combat, about what telling them the truth would do. I need time, I said. Need to think about whether truth is always better than mercy, whether exposing your guilt serves any purpose except transferring your suffering to them. Take whatever time you need. I have maybe 3 months. But please, make a decision. Don't let me die with this secret still hidden. I left California without agreeing to help. Spent weeks wrestling with the decision. Read everything I could about moral obligations, about truth versus mercy, about what we owe to the dead and to the living. And I thought about Jenkins, Rodriguez, Chen, and Kowalski. About whether they'd want their families to know the truth, or whether they'd prefer the comfortable lie that kept their families from additional pain. Finally, I made my decision. I would help Ducking tell one family, Jenkins's daughter. She was old enough, mature enough, far enough removed from the immediate trauma to potentially handle the truth without being destroyed by it. But I wouldn't help him contact the others. Rodriguez's widow was 90 years old. Chen's siblings were in their 80s. Kowalski's brother had his own health issues. Telling them seemed cruel, a transfer of guilt that would only cause harm. I called Jenkins's daughter, Catherine, explained that I'd served with her father, that there was information about his death she might want to know. Asked if she'd be willing to meet with me and the translator who'd worked with our unit. She agreed immediately. I've wanted to understand my father's death my whole life. Whatever you can tell me, I want to hear it. We met in California, me, Duke, and Catherine, in that same restaurant where Duke had first confessed to me, and we told her everything. Catherine listened without interrupting. When we finished, she was quiet for a long time. So my father died because of a mistranslation. Because this man lied about what Vietnamese villagers said, and I've spent 60 years not knowing that. Yes, Duke said, and I'm so sorry. I know sorry doesn't begin to cover it. I know nothing I say can make up for what my lie cost you, but I needed you to know the truth. Catherine looked at her father's photograph, the one Duke had kept on his altar for decades. You've been honoring him, lighting incense, keeping his memory. It was the least I could do, though it's nothing compared to what I took from you. No, Catherine agreed. It's not, but it's something. It's acknowledgement. It's 54 years of guilt that shows you never forgot what you did. She turned to me. And you, did you know? Not until 6 weeks ago when Duke contacted me. I believed your father died in random combat. I had no idea the ambush was connected to mistranslation. Are you angry at him? At Duke? I thought about that. I was. When he first told me, I was furious, wanted to blame him for everything. But over time I've come to understand he was a 22-year-old trying to protect civilians in an impossible situation. He made a terrible decision with consequences he didn't foresee. That doesn't excuse it, but it provides context. Catherine stood and walked to the altar, looked at all 4 photographs, her father and his 3 brothers in arms who died with him. I'm angry, she finally said. Angry that this happened. Angry that I didn't know for 60 years. Angry that my father died because of someone else's lie. But I'm also grateful, I guess, that you finally told me. That you didn't let the truth die with you. She turned to Duke. You robbed me of my father. Nothing you do can give him back. But you've given me understanding, closure, knowledge of exactly what happened instead of vague stories about combat. And that's worth something. I don't forgive you, but I acknowledge your confession. And I believe that you've been carrying guilt for 54 years. That has to count for something. Duke was crying. Thank you. I don't deserve your acknowledgement. But thank you. We talked for hours more. Catherine asking questions about her father, wanting to know everything we remembered. Duke providing details about the interrogation, the village, the context of that moment in me sharing memories of Jenkins as a Marine, as a friend, as a man who'd talked constantly about the daughter he couldn't wait to meet. Before we parted, Catherine made a decision. I don't think the other families should be told. Rodriguez's widow is too old. The others are too fragile. This truth would destroy them without providing the closure it gave me. But I want this documented, preserved, so that historians, researchers, people studying Vietnam understand that mistakes like this happened, that mistranslations had real consequences, that the fog of war included communication failures that cost lives. So we documented it, created a detailed record of what happened. Duck's confession, my testimony, Catherine's response, all the evidence Duck had preserved. We sealed it with instructions that it be opened in 2044, 75 years after the incident, when everyone directly involved would certainly be dead. Duck died 2 months later. At his funeral, Catherine spoke about forgiveness and understanding, about how her father's death had shaped her entire life, and how learning the truth had finally given her peace even though the truth was painful. Duck lived 54 years carrying guilt for a mistake he made at 22, she said. That's a lifetime of punishment. He never forgot my father, never dismissed what his lie cost our family, and at the end he found the courage to tell the truth even though the truth condemned him. That's not redemption, but it's honest, and sometimes honest is all we can hope for. I visit Duck's grave sometimes, and Jenkins's grave in the military cemetery where he was buried 54 years ago. 2 men connected by a mistranslation and its terrible consequences. Jenkins died at 19, killed in an ambush enabled by false intelligence. Duck died at 76, destroyed by 54 years of guilt over that false intelligence. Both casualties of Vietnam, just in different ways. The truth is now preserved, sealed until 2044. Catherine knows, I know, and now the story exists for future generations who can judge Duck's actions with the benefit of distance and perspective. Was he a villain who got 4 Marines killed through deliberate deception? Or was he a young man making an impossible choice in an impossible war who couldn't foresee the consequences? I've spent years trying to answer that question. I still don't have a clear answer. What I know is that war creates situations with no good options. Duck chose to protect civilians through mistranslation, and that choice cost American lives. If he'd translated accurately, American forces might have been harsher with the village, and different people would have died. There was no choice that didn't result in death, only different choices about who would die. Duck made his choice, carried it for 54 years, finally confessed before he died. That's all any of us can do in impossible situations. Make our choices, carry the consequences, and try to tell the truth before the end. Jenkins, Rodriguez, Chen, and Kowalski deserved better than to die from mistranslated intelligence, but they also deserved to be remembered accurately. Not just as casualties of combat, but as victims of the impossible complexity of fighting in a country where even language could be weaponized. The truth is preserved now. Painful, complicated, unsatisfying truth, but truth nonetheless.